We deeply appreciate all of you. We'd love to hear where in the world you're tuning in from right now. Drop a comment and let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The late September sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting golden hues as Mark Harrison scrubbed remnants of drywall dust from his hands, the result of 25 years in construction. His hands bore the calluses and scars of countless completed projects and promises fulfilled. A glance at the clock showed 3:15 p.m. His son, Tyler, was at basketball practice until 6, giving him time to finalize the Andrews project estimates. A persistent buzzing on the counter broke his focus. Tyler's phone, left behind in his rush, lit up with notifications. Mark might have ignored it, but the previewed messages froze him in place. Dad doesn't even. Brad said we could. Mom thinks. The fragments alone were enough to send a chill through Mark. His steady hands, capable of aligning beams and crafting flawless tile work, trembled as he picked up the phone. The thread between Tyler and his friend Eric revealed a devastating tale. No, Dad's clueless about Mom's new boyfriend, Tyler had written earlier. Brad drives that new Audi A5, the one we saw at the dealership. He lets me drive it around the neighborhood. Way cooler than Dad's old truck. Says I've got a knack for it. Eric's reply popped up. Damn, bro. Your mom's boss? That's wild. Your dad really doesn't know? Tyler's response hit like a sledgehammer. Nah, he's too busy with his precious job sites. Mom says he wouldn't notice if she painted the house neon green. Brad even got us floor seats for the Knicks game next weekend. Dad thinks I'm studying for SATs. Mark's jaw tightened as he scrolled further. Each message was a blow to his carefully built life. Brad's teaching me golf next week, Tyler had written. Says it's critical for making business connections. Dad just drones on about honest work and how calluses tell your story. Such old man advice. The final text sent Mark reeling. Honestly, I'd rather have Brad as a dad. He listens to me talk about college. Dad just rants about earning things. Brad says connections matter more now. Welcome to 2024, old man. The sound of the garage door interrupted Mark's thoughts. His wife, Jenna, wasn't supposed to be home for hours. Quickly, he placed the phone. Back on the counter, his mind racing. Jenna entered, designer handbag swinging. Oh, Mark, you're home early. Her smile faltered. She wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than a month of his work. I thought you had that big project in Miami today. Finished early. Mark replied evenly. The crew worked hard. Good men. Reliable. His emphasis didn't go unnoticed. Jenna hesitated, keys jangling in her manicured fingers. That's nice, honey. I just forgot some paperwork. The dealership's been crazy this week. Mark's gaze didn't waver. Selling a lot of A5s? Jenna froze. What? Audis, he said, his voice calm. Tyler mentioned them. Seems he's quite the fan these days. Her color drained. Well, you know teenagers in cars, she stammered. I should get back. Brad, Mr. Clark, needs these reports. Brad. Mark repeated, the name dripping with disdain. Your sales manager. The one taking my son on joyrides. Teaching him golf. Buying Knicks tickets. Jenna's composure cracked. How did you? Are you spying on me? Mark's laugh was devoid of humor. Spying? No need. Tyler left his phone. Seems he's proud of his new mentor. His voice lowered. Tell me, Jenna, does Brad know you're spending the college fund I built with my own hands on this little adventure of yours? It's not like that, Jenna snapped. You're always working, covered in sawdust and concrete. Brad understands. Understands what? Mark cut her off, his voice sharp. How to spend another man's money. How to play father with another man's son. Jenna's defiance wavered. Brad has ambition. He's helping Tyler network. You don't understand modern business, Mark. What Tyler needs, Mark countered, his voice steady, is to learn the difference between men who build things and men who take shortcuts. Guess we're all about to learn that lesson. Jenna's confidence faltered. What do you mean? Mark didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped aside. You should get going. Brad's waiting. Oh, and Jenna, hope that fancy jacket keeps you warm. Winter's coming. Her face paled as she hurried out. Once the car was gone, Mark pulled out his phone and made a call. Ethan? Mark Harrison. Remember that backup plan we discussed? It's time. Every account. Leave nothing. Ethan's office smelled of polished wood and leather, a far cry from the gritty job sites Mark was used to. As the accountant pulled up digital statements, Mark leaned in, his expression resolute. It's all here. Ethan confirmed, showing him the screen. Jenna has been regularly accessing the joint accounts for business lunches at Le Bernardin 2 to 3 times a week, averaging $250 per visit. Phil clicked through the transactions. The pattern started 3 months ago, right when Brad Carter joined Elite Autos as their sales manager. Mark leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the dates. Show me Tyler's expenses. Phil brought up another statement. The private school lunch account shows doubled spending. 2 lunches charged most days. Gourmet restaurants delivering to the school. Adjusting his glasses, Phil continued, there's more. Concert tickets, sports events, golf club memberships, all charged to your joint credit cards. The college fund remains untouched, but she's been inquiring about early withdrawal options. Lock it down, Mark ordered. Transfer everything to the new accounts we set up. I want it done before the banks close today. Phil nodded, typing swiftly. The business accounts are secure. She never had access to those. Smart move, keeping Harrison Construction separate. He paused, glancing at Mark. But you should know she tried accessing them last week. Called pretending to be your assistant, asking about contracts and billing. Mark's jaw clenched. The Andrews project? She specifically asked about it. Phil nodded. Wanted the payment schedule. That's a $4 million contract. Mark stood and began pacing. She's not just involved with him. They're planning something. Phil leaned back in his chair. There's more. I dug into Brad Carter. He's got a pattern. 3 dealerships in 5 years, each time leaving after entanglements with married clients. 2 harassment complaints, both quietly settled. His Audi? Leased under the dealership's name. It's all flash, no substance. Mark's expression darkened. Well, the show's about to end. Mark pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. You know Laura Phillips, the divorce attorney? Took her client's cheating husband for everything last year. Even got his boat. Phil smirked. Want her number? I've got it, Mark replied. Built a custom deck for her last summer. Pausing at the office door, he turned back. Phil, one more thing. Pull every receipt, every bank statement from the last 20 years. Every hour I worked, every dollar I earned. I want a complete record showing how we built this life. Phil held up a flash drive. Already done. Your wife's recent spree makes a sharp contrast to your deposit history. 16-hour days. Weekend jobs. It's all there. No. Judge will miss the message. Mark pocketed the drive. Send everything to Laura. And Phil, thank you for having my back all these years. You're one of the good ones, Mark, Phil replied. Built your business honest. Paid your taxes clean. Can't say the same for Brad Carter. His credit report? The guy's leveraged to his eyeballs. I doubt his dealership knows about his gambling debts. Walking to his truck, Mark called Laura Phillips' office. Her secretary immediately recognized his name. Mr. Harrison? Miss Phillips can see you at 4. Her law firm occupied the top floor of a building Mark's company had renovated years earlier. Laura greeted him with a firm handshake, her tailored suit exuding authority. Phil sent over the files, she said, leading him to a sleek conference room. I've reviewed everything. You've given me a lot to work with. Call me Mark, he said, settling into a chair. What's my next move? Laura spread out the documents. You've already made the smart moves, securing assets, documenting the affair, protecting the business. She tapped her pen against a legal pad. But timing is crucial. Your wife's spending and inquiries about your accounts suggest they're escalating. We need to act. Before they can. She pulled out a highlighted document. The college fund is safe for now, but your documentation shows you built it through honest, documented work. Her recent behavior demonstrates financial irresponsibility. Laura continued. Once she realizes the accounts are locked, she'll lawyer up. We need to strike first. File for abandonment and adultery. The text from your son? They'll hit hard in court. Judges take parental alienation seriously. Mark absorbed her strategy, asking precise questions about custody, asset division, and timelines. As the meeting concluded, Laura had one final question. The house you mentioned, you built it yourself? Every nail, every board, Mark confirmed. Took 5 years of weekends while working full-time. Laura smiled. Perfect. Sweat equity holds value in court. Go home, Mark. Act normal. Let us handle the groundwork. When we move, it'll be decisive. Driving home, Mark reflected on the plan. The setting sun cast long shadows over the city, mirroring the turmoil of the morning. He pulled into a hardware store parking lot, a new resolve taking shape. 20 minutes later, Mark walked out of the hardware store carrying a new toolbox, an exact replica of the one that had taught Tyler his first lessons. About building. The old one would go with Mark tonight, but the replacement would stay, a silent reminder about legacies and choices. Some lessons, after all, took time to teach. Evening shadows stretched across the driveway as Mark loaded essentials into his truck. The new toolbox sat in the garage, placed precisely where the original had rested for 15 years. He worked steadily, choosing what to take. Documents, family photos from before Jenna's betrayal, and his late father's carpentry journals. The house phone rang. Jenna's mother, Evelyn. Mark, dear, is Jenna there? She's not answering her cell. Working late, Mark replied evenly. End of quarter at the dealership. Oh, Evelyn hesitated. She mentioned a new manager, Brad, I think, said he's been shaking things up at work. Mark's grip on the phone tightened. Did she mention the Knicks tickets, too? Or just the business dinners? Evelyn paused, her tone shifting. Oh, Mark, please tell me she didn't. Ask her yourself, Evelyn, Mark said, his voice softening. You've always been kind to me. A better mother-in-law than I deserved. And Tyler, she asked hesitantly. Learning some hard lessons, Mark replied, glancing at his watch. I need to go. Take care of yourself, Evelyn. You too, Mark. Not all of us are on her side in this. After hanging up, Mark logged into his home office computer one last time. The secret camera feed from the garage showed Jenna's late-night routine, arriving after 11, checking her car's odometer, and adjusting her makeup in the mirror. Small deceptions, all recorded and time-stamped. His phone buzzed, a text from Tyler. Dad, can I get $50 for dinner with the team after practice? Mark replied, check your lunch account. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. It says insufficient funds? Must be a mistake. No mistake, Mark typed back. Ask Brad for lunch money tomorrow. I'm sure he'll be happy to help. Radio silence followed. Mark forwarded the exchange to Laura, adding it to the growing file. His next call was to Tyler's school, Ridgewood Academy. Mr. Perkins? This is Mark Harrison. About Tyler's tuition. The administrator pulled up the records. Yes, Mr. Harrison. The next quarter's payment is due soon. Will you be using the same account? No, Mark said firmly. I'm withdrawing financial responsibility for Tyler's education, effective immediately. I've emailed documentation showing that the tuition agreement was solely between myself and Ridgewood. Jenna was never a signatory. There was a long pause on the other end. I see. This is unusual, Mr. Harrison. Tyler is a senior, close to graduating. His mother has been handling his college plans recently. I'm sure she'll take over. Mark added, you should also know that recent Knicks tickets and a golf club membership charged to the parent association account were unauthorized by me. Those transactions used Jenna's credentials. The administrator hesitated. The membership was endorsed by a Brad Carter, claiming networking benefits for senior students. Interesting, Mark said coldly. I've built 2 additions to Ridgewood Academy, Mr. Perkins. Never once mixed business with personal gain. You may want to investigate those charges. The administrator cleared his throat. We'll look into it immediately. And Mr. Harrison? I'm sorry about this situation. Tyler is a good student, despite recent changes. Recent changes. That's diplomatic. Let's say his new designer wardrobe hasn't gone unnoticed by the staff. After the call, Mark walked through the house one last time. In the kitchen, he left the divorce papers in plain view, along with printed screenshots of Tyler's texts and Jenna's financial transactions. His simple gold wedding band sat atop the pile, a stark contrast to Jenna's. Upgraded diamonds. His phone buzzed again, Phil confirming the final transfers were complete. Everything Mark had worked for over 20 years, every dollar, now secured. Jenna's next extravagant purchase would meet an insufficient funds alert. Outside, the last light of day faded as Mark loaded his father's original toolbox into the truck. He paused at his workbench, where a faded photo was pinned to the corkboard. A 10-year-old Tyler holding his first hammer, smiling beside a half-built treehouse. Mark carefully unpinned it and tucked it into his wallet. The empty space on the board stood out, a pale reminder of what had been lost. As Mark climbed into his truck, he looked through the windshield at the house he had built himself. Every window, every beam had been crafted by his hands. In the dimming light, it looked no different from the other upscale homes in the neighborhood. But to Mark, it no longer felt like home. But Mark knew every inch of the house he built, its foundation, its hidden strength beneath the polished surface. "Your move," he murmured, starting the engine. The truck rolled away quietly, leaving behind a house laden with carefully set traps and shattered illusions. In the garage, the new toolbox sat waiting, a silent reminder of the difference between building a life and borrowing one. The night swallowed the truck's taillights as Mark headed north, toward a small town where he'd secured a contract to construct a community center. Time to start fresh. Time to build something new. Behind him, his phone vibrated with multiple incoming calls. Jenna, Tyler, the credit card company. Each one went unanswered, fading into the growing darkness like pebbles sinking into a deep well. Some silences, after all, spoke louder than words. Jenna's morning began like any other, her confidence unshaken as she pulled into the Starbucks drive-thru, her designer sunglasses perched perfectly atop freshly highlighted hair. The barista's voice crackled through the speaker, taking her elaborate order of a sugar-free vanilla latte with almond milk, extra hot, light foam. "That'll be $8.75, Mrs. Harrison." Jenna extended her platinum card with manicured fingers, the same way she had countless times before. The barista swiped it once, twice, then frowned. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrison. It's showing declined." "That's impossible," Jenna said, her voice tinged with the entitlement of someone unaccustomed to inconvenience. "Try again." 3 attempts later, the line of cars behind her began honking impatiently. Flustered, Jenna rummaged through her Louis Vuitton wallet for another card. Each swipe brought the same result: declined. "Perhaps it's an issue with your system," she suggested, her composure slipping. The teenage barista shrugged. "System's fine, Mrs. Harrison. Other customers' cards are working." Humiliation burning her cheeks, Jenna pulled out of the drive-thru, her phone already in hand. She opened her banking app, only to be greeted with an error message: "Account access restricted. Please contact your financial institution." Her fingers shook as she dialed Mark's number. Straight to voicemail. She tried again, and again. "Mrs. Harrison?" Her assistant's voice cut through the panic. "Tyler's school is on line 1. They say it's urgent." Switching calls, Jenna felt her stomach twist. Tyler's panicked voice filled the car's Bluetooth. "Mom, something's wrong," he said, his voice cracking. "My lunch account says insufficient funds. The bursar wants to talk about tuition." "Honey, calm down," Jenna tried to reassure him. "I'm sure it's just a mistake." Before she could continue, the school secretary interrupted. "Mrs. Harrison, please hold. The European trip coordinator needs to speak with you." Another voice cut in abruptly. "Mrs. Harrison, we're calling about the final payment for Tyler's senior trip. The transaction was reversed. Without immediate payment, his spot will be forfeited." Jenna gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "Listen, there's been a mistake. My husband, Mom." Tyler's voice rose in panic. "They're saying I can't attend classes without the tuition payment. What's going on?" Jenna swung her BMW into a U-turn, tires screeching. "I'm coming to the school, baby. Don't worry. I'll fix this." The 15-minute drive home took her less than 10. Her heels echoed across the garage floor as she rushed inside, calling Mark's name. Silence greeted her. In the master bedroom, Jenna stopped cold. Mark's side of the closet was half empty, his work boots and clothes gone. The dresser drawers stood open, barren. The safe door hung ajar, empty except for a stack of papers and printed screenshots. Her hands trembled as she picked up the top sheet. Divorce papers, already filed. Beneath them, highlighted in yellow, were copies of Tyler's text messages to his friend Eric. The ones about Brad, the Audi test drives, and preferring Brad as a father. No, 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 Jenna whispered, scattering the papers as she frantically grabbed her phone. Brad, pick up. Please pick up. His voicemail answered instead. Jenna collapsed onto the bed she had shared with Mark for 20 years, the same bed she'd left for late-night work meetings with Brad. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was the bank manager. Mrs. Harrison, I'm calling about unusual activity on your accounts. What accounts? Jenna whispered, her voice breaking. Jenna's voice sounded foreign to her own ears. What's left? That's just it, Mrs. Harrison, the bank manager replied. The joint accounts have been closed, the investment portfolio liquidated, and the credit cards canceled. Mr. Harrison's signature and documentation are on all transactions. Jenna's gaze drifted to the blinking light of the garage security camera, the one Mark had installed last month, citing neighborhood break-ins. The same camera that had silently recorded her late-night returns, her odometer checks, her adjustments in the car mirror. The garage held one final blow. The spot where Mark's father's toolbox had sat for 15 years now stood empty. In its place was a pristine replica, untouched, a silent mockery of everything broken and replaced. Tyler's calls continued to light up her phone. The school's bursar, the trip coordinator, the bank manager, each demanding answers she couldn't give. Jenna stared at her reflection in the bedroom mirror, seeing for the first time how her designer clothes and flawless makeup now seemed like a cheap disguise. Downstairs, the security camera blinked steadily, documenting her unraveling piece by piece. The sound of a car in the driveway made her rush to the window. But instead of Mark's truck, a sleek Audi A5 pulled up. Brad stepped out, his polished demeanor cracked by worry. Jenna? What's going on? The dealership's cards are declining for the lunch order. She turned away from the window, tears smudging her expensive mascara. In the garage, the new toolbox gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the camera capturing everything just as Mark had planned. At Ridgewood Academy, tension buzzed in the administrative office as Jenna and Brad sat before Headmaster Lawrence, whose mahogany desk felt more like a judge's bench. Mrs. Harrison, Lawrence began, adjusting his glasses. Ridgewood has always valued the Harrison family's contributions. Your husband's construction company has been integral to our campus development. However, he slid a document across the desk. The tuition agreement is solely under Mr. Harrison's name. Legally, we cannot continue Tyler's enrollment without payment. Surely there's a way to work something out, Brad interjected, his sails hardened. Smile in place. I understand Mark's having difficulties, but Tyler's education shouldn't suffer. Lawrence's gaze hardened. Mr. Carter, while we appreciate your concern, you have no legal standing in this matter. He turned to Jenna. Furthermore, the Parent Association flagged several unauthorized charges. Knicks tickets, golf club memberships. These are serious concerns. Those were networking opportunities, Jenna protested, her voice rising. For Tyler's future. Speaking of Tyler's future, Lawrence continued, his acceptance to Stanford is contingent on completing his senior year here. Without immediate payment, he let the sentence trail off. Brad cleared his throat. Perhaps I could. No, Lawrence cut him off. School policy is clear. Only legal guardians may handle tuition matters. Rising, he signaled the meeting's end. Tyler can finish this week. After that, we'll prepare his transfer papers. Outside, the brisk November wind whipped Jenna's designer coat as she and Brad hurried to his car. This is insane, she fumed. Mark can't just destroy everything we built. Brad's laugh was sharp. From what I've seen, Mark did the building. You just spent the profits. Loosening his silk tie, he sighed. Jenna turned to him, hope flaring. You said you'd help? What about your Q4 bonus? Yeah, about that. Brad shifted uncomfortably. The dealership's investigating some irregularities in my accounts, and my ex-wife's lawyer is reviewing my finances for more support payments. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. The Audi's a dealer demo. I can't exactly. Can't what? Jenna's voice rose, desperate. Can't help the woman who risked everything for you? The son you promised to mentor? Brad's expression hardened. Be reasonable, Jenna. I never promised. You said you loved me. That Tyler deserved better than a father who couldn't see his potential. Brad smirked, his polished charm gone. I said what I needed to close the deal. It's called sales, honey. You should know, you've been selling Mark short for years. Jenna's slap cracked across his face, leaving a red mark on his smug expression. You bastard. Reality check, sweetheart, Brad muttered, stepping into his car without a backward glance. Brad touched his cheek, his gaze icy. You wanted the fantasy, luxury cars, expensive dinners, VIP treatment. Mark wanted to build something real. Guess who made the better investment? Jenna's phone buzzed. Another text from Tyler. Mom! Eric's parents know everything. His dad canceled the construction contract with Dad's company. Everyone's talking. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, Tyler's circle of affluent friends vanished. Parents who had hired Mark's company for home renovations suddenly remembered other commitments. The country club Jenna had frequented now claimed to be fully booked whenever she called. At the dealership, whispers followed her through the hallways. Her office, once a symbol of professional success, now felt like a glass cage. Every gaze seemed to linger, watching as her carefully curated world unraveled. Mrs. Harrison? Her assistant hovered in the doorway. The general manager wants to see you. The meeting was short. Concerns about professional conduct. Questions about unauthorized use of dealer demo vehicles. References to the company's moral clause. We'll need your resignation by the end of the day, the GM concluded. And Mrs. Harrison? Mr. Carter has accepted a transfer to our Phoenix location, effective immediately. That evening, Jenna sat alone in her spotless kitchen, surrounded by the life Mark had built. A life she had traded for borrowed luxuries and empty promises. Her phone displayed a banking app notification, account balance, $621.45. She thought back to 2008, when the recession had threatened their livelihood. Mark had taken whatever jobs he could find, working nights and weekends to keep their family afloat. She had complained about his long hours, the smell of drywall dust, and his rough hands, never realizing he was laying the foundation for her designer lifestyle. The doorbell rang. Tyler stood there, his private school uniform rumpled, his eyes red. Mom! His voice cracked. The guys at school, they're saying things about you and Brad. Dad's clients are calling their kids, telling them to stay away from me. You look smaller, younger somehow. What's going to happen to us? Jenna stared at her son, finally seeing the consequences of letting him trade his father's hard-earned wisdom for a flashy car and hollow promises. The garage security camera blinked steadily, recording yet another piece of evidence in Mark's meticulously planned case. Pack your things, she managed to say. We need to figure something out. Figure what out? Tyler's voice rose, full of panic. My college acceptance? My friends? Everything's gone. In the distance, a truck engine rumbled. For a fleeting moment, Jenna's heart leapt, but it was just a delivery vehicle, not Mark's familiar truck. In the garage, the new toolbox sat untouched, a silent testament to the difference between men who build and men who simply sell. The reality. Mark had orchestrated closed in like a perfectly constructed trap, leaving Jenna to face the aftermath of trading depth for appearances, construction for pretense, and real love for temporary luxury. 3 weeks felt like a lifetime. Jenna stood in the echoing foyer of their once pristine home, watching as her collection of designer handbags was loaded into a consignment shop owner's van. Each Chanel, Gucci, and Louis Vuitton bag, with its certificate of authenticity still intact, was sold for a fraction of its original price. That's the best I can offer, the owner said, handing her a check. The market's flooded with luxury items these days. Tyler trudged down the stairs, dressed in plain clothes instead of his Ridgewood uniform. Tomorrow would be his first day at Franklin Public High School. The Lakers tickets and Audi drives felt like a distant dream now. Eric's dad called. Tyler muttered, slumping against the wall. Said he's pulling out of the Ridgeview development project. Called Dad the most principled contractor he's ever worked with. Right before he hung up on me. Jenna folded the consignment check, barely enough to cover a single month's mortgage. We'll figure something out. Like what, Mom? Tyler's voice cracked, filled with bitterness. Brad's gone. Dad's gone. Stanford rescinded my early acceptance when they found out I couldn't finish at Ridgewood. He kicked the baseboard Mark had installed years ago. Everything's gone because you couldn't keep your hands off your coworker. He wasn't my boss, Jenna snapped, then caught herself. I've hired a private investigator. Your father can't just disappear. He didn't disappear, Tyler interrupted. He left. Because of us. He pulled out his phone and showed her a contractor's website. Look what Eric sent me. On the screen was a photo of a community center under construction 2 hours north. In the background, just visible, was Mark's distinctive red pickup truck. I'm going to find him, Tyler said, grabbing his jacket. Jenna followed without protest. The drive north felt endless. Her remaining credit card, a low-limit emergency card in her maiden name, barely covered the gas. They passed landmarks where Mark had built homes, each one a testament to his reputation for quality and integrity. At the edge of a small town, the steel and concrete skeleton of the community center rose against the gray November sky. Workers moved purposefully across the site, and there, directing operations near a cement mixer, stood Mark. He looked leaner, his shoulders set with resolve, his stance more rigid. The wedding ring was gone from his left hand as he gestured to the crew, explaining something about the foundation pour. Tyler stepped out of the car before Jenna could stop him. Dad! Mark's head turned slightly at the sound of his son's voice, but his hands didn't pause, continuing to smooth the wet cement with practiced precision. Tyler approached the safety barrier, his voice breaking. Dad, please. I messed up. I didn't mean those things. The cement mixer's steady rhythm filled the silence. The other workers exchanged glances and busied themselves elsewhere. Mark continued smoothing the concrete, every stroke deliberate. I know now, Tyler continued, gripping the barrier. I know everything you did for us. The recession jobs, the long hours, Stanford's tuition savings. His voice wavered. Brad's gone. Transferred to Arizona when things got tough. Just like you said, men who build things versus men who sell them. Mark's hand stilled for a moment before he spoke, his voice cutting through the heavy air. Funny how you didn't mean it, but you still let him play dad while I worked overtime for your future. Mark, Jenna stepped forward, her voice pleading. We can fix this. Fix? Mark turned, cement dust clinging to his clothes. Like you fixed our marriage with your dealership boyfriend? Or how you fixed Tyler's character with borrowed cars and courtside seats? His laugh was sharp, devoid of humor. Some things can't be fixed, Jenna. They have to be rebuilt. From the ground up. We'll do better, she begged. Give us another chance. Another chance? Mark set down his trowel, his eyes unyielding. You had 20 years of chances. 20 years of me building something real while you dreamed of something borrowed. He gestured toward the community center behind him. This is real. Every beam, every nail, every yard of concrete. It'll stand long after that leased Audi is scrap metal. Tyler stepped closer to the barrier, his voice earnest. Dad'll transfer schools. Get a job. Learn the business from the bottom up. Mark's expression softened slightly, his voice turning contemplative. Bottom up? Funny you mentioned that. Got a call from Stanford's engineering department. Seems they're interested in practical experience as much as transcripts. Told them about a kid who might want to learn construction from the foundation up. He paused, the weight of his words sinking in. Their response is in your old room, under the new toolbox. A flicker of hope lit Tyler's face, but it faded just as quickly. But you're not coming back. Back? Mark shook his head, picking up his trowel again. No. Forward? Maybe. Depends on what you build from here. He turned back to his work. Choose carefully, son. Borrowed things get repossessed. Built things last. Jenna watched as Tyler's shoulders sagged, her son unable to meet his father's steady gaze. The cement mixer's rhythm resumed, drowning out any response. Around them, the community center continued to rise, every beam and board a testament to the unyielding difference between building a life and borrowing one. The drive home stretched longer than the journey out. Tyler stared at his hands, soft, uncalloused hands that had never known real work. In the passenger seat, Jenna's designer watch caught the setting sun, its polished face reflecting a future stripped of its artificial shine. Mark's words echoed between them. Some things have to be rebuilt from the ground up. The question was whether they'd recognize themselves when the reconstruction began. The for sale sign swayed in the winter wind as Jenna supervised the movers packing the last remnants of her life with Mark. The real estate agent had warned her about the down market and how the mortgage would swallow most of their equity, but she hadn't expected such a meager payout. Mrs. Harrison? The moving foreman approached with a clipboard. There's an issue with the payment. Jenna closed her eyes. Her finance manager's salary, once a source of pride, now barely covered the essentials. The two-bedroom apartment she'd found in a less desirable part of town waited for her. Its beige walls and worn carpet a far cry from the home Mark had built. Tyler stood in the doorway of his old room, now empty except for Mark's new toolbox, still untouched. Mr. Davis called, Tyler said quietly. The garage needs an answer about the job. The local repair shop had offered him an entry-level position. Minimum wage, oil changes, tire rotations. Work that would have been beneath him 3 months ago. Now, with college plans derailed and their savings gone, it felt like a lifeline. Take it, Jenna said hollowly. Tyler nodded, already pulling up the shop's number. His designer clothes had been replaced with practical wear his manicured hands beginning to show the first signs of honest work. Watching the transformation hurt more than she could admit. Later that evening, in their cramped apartment, Jenna unpacked boxes while Tyler assembled secondhand furniture. The walls were thin enough to hear their neighbors arguing about overdue bills, a conversation that struck too close to home. Brad called, Tyler said suddenly, tightening a bolt on a wobbly table. From Phoenix. Jenna's hands froze on a box of kitchen items. And he asked if we needed money. Tyler continued, his laugh devoid of humor. Said he felt bad about everything. Then mentioned his ex-wife's lawyer found out about us, and he's facing a bigger settlement. Wanted to know if you'd testify nothing happened until after his separation. That bastard, Jenna muttered, slumping against the counter. After everything he promised. Like what, Mom? Tyler's voice turned sharp. That he'd replace Dad? That his borrowed Audi and Nick's tickets actually meant something? Dad tried to tell me the difference between earning something and borrowing it. Jenna's phone buzzed, a notification for an overtime deposit. The finance manager job she'd once flaunted now felt like a cruel joke. She remembered Mark's sacrifices during the 2008 recession. How? He took any work to keep them afloat. At the time, she had complained about the long hours and dirty clothes, not realizing the quiet dignity in his choices. Your father, she began. Don't. Tyler stood abruptly. Don't talk about Dad. You traded everything he built for a guy who leases luxury cars and runs when things get tough. He grabbed his keys to the used Honda Civic he'd bought with his own savings. Not a borrowed luxury car. I've got training at the garage. Mr. Davis says if I learn fast, I might move to real repairs by spring. After Tyler left, Jenna wandered through their small apartment. The furniture was functional but cheap. Nothing like the custom pieces Mark had built. The windows overlooked a parking lot instead of the manicured lawn he used to maintain. Even the air felt different, stale and confined, missing the scent of wood and honest work that had filled their old home. Her phone buzzed again with another bill notification. The designer wardrobe she once flaunted at charity galas had been sold piece by piece. Her social circle, built around Mark's success and reputation, had evaporated. Even her job felt precarious, with rumors of layoffs circulating after Brad's sudden departure. In the kitchen, Jenna found Tyler's first garage paycheck stub. The amount was pitiful compared to the allowance they used to give him, but his scribbled notes showed careful budgeting, a lesson Mark had tried to teach for years. The irony stung. Jenna had pushed Tyler toward Brad's flashy lifestyle, dismissing Mark's emphasis on hard work as outdated. Now, Tyler was learning his father's values the hard way, one oil change at a time. A text from the real estate agent interrupted her thoughts. Final papers ready. Buyer offering 15% below asking. Recommend accepting. Market's not improving. Jenna typed back her agreement, then opened her banking app. After the mortgage was settled, she'd barely have enough for 3 months' rent. Her salary could cover the basics, but the life she'd known, the one Mark had built, was gone. Through the thin walls, She heard their neighbors arguing again. A child upset about changing schools. A mother promising things would get better. Jenna's eyes fell on Mark's new toolbox, still sitting untouched in Tyler's room. A silent reminder of the difference between building something real and chasing borrowed dreams. Tomorrow, Tyler would return to the garage, continuing to learn the value of honest work. Jenna would go back to the dealership, selling the luxury she'd once thought she deserved. Somewhere north, Mark would keep building, his hands crafting something lasting, while she lived with the consequences of dismantling what he had already built. The winter wind rattled the apartment's poorly installed windows. Jenna thought back to how Mark had upgraded their home's windows himself, explaining the importance of proper materials and sealing. Another lesson she dismissed as boring, now understood too late: the difference between appearance and substance. 6 months of manual labor had transformed Tyler in ways no private school ever could. His hands, once soft with privilege, now bore the marks of real work. As the morning sun rose, Tyler pulled his used Honda into the construction site where Mark's latest project stood. Gripping a new toolbox purchased with 3 months of overtime pay, Tyler watched the crew arrive. Each worker nodded to Mark with genuine respect, a stark contrast to the false admiration Brad had commanded. Sites closed to visitors. A foreman called, noticing Tyler. Mark turned at the voice, his expression unchanging as he recognized his son. The past months had aged him too, but differently. He stood straighter, unburdened. By pretense, "I'm not visiting," Tyler said, lifting the toolbox. "I'm here to work. Got your certifications?" Mark's voice was professional, distant. "OSHA requirements?" Tyler pulled neatly folded papers from his pocket. Level 1 construction safety certification. Been studying after shifts at the garage. Mr. Davis, my boss, wrote me a reference letter too. Mark examined the documents as his crew subtly watched from a distance. Says here you've developed good diagnostic skills, attention to detail, strong work ethic. His eyes met Tyler's. Davis isn't easily impressed. Learned that myself working up from oil changes. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. Started reading engineering textbooks too. The community college offers night classes in construction management. A faint smile touched Mark's lips. Thought you were too good for community college. Wasn't Stanford your dream? Stanford was Mom's dream. And Brad's, Tyler replied, his voice hardening at the name. I've got different dreams now. I want to build something real, not borrow someone else's success. Mark studied his son, not the entitled teenager who had once mocked his life's work, but a young man beginning to grasp the value of earned wisdom. The crew, unable to pretend any longer, listened in silence, their own hard lessons reflected in Tyler's transformation. Your hands, Mark said. Let me see them. Tyler extended his hands, calloused, oil-stained, and sporting a fresh cut from a stubborn transmission. Working hands, learning hands. A stark contrast to the soft, manicured fingers that once gripped Brad's leased Audi. Mom sold the house, Tyler said quietly. The one you built. Some developers tearing it down, putting up cheap condos. Mark's jaw tightened. Foundations matter, he said simply. In buildings and in life. You can't put luxury finishes on shaky ground. I know that now. Tyler placed his toolbox next to a stack of lumber. The garage taught me something: you can't rush skill. Can't fake experience. Every engine I fix, every problem I solve, it's like you always said. Building knowledge from the ground up. Mark picked up a set of blueprints. We're short a materials runner. Basic work. Fetching supplies. Learning inventory. $7 an hour. Less than your garage job. He paused. But you'll learn every piece that goes into making something stand. When do I start? Tyler asked. Now. Mark handed him a hard hat. Safety first. Like I taught you with that treehouse. The memory hit Tyler hard. Summer afternoons, his father patiently explaining load-bearing joints and the importance of level foundations. Lessons Tyler had once dismissed in favor of Brad's empty promises. About that treehouse, Tyler reached into his toolbox and pulled out a worn photograph. Found this in Mom's stuff while packing. Remember? Mark took the photo, his younger self, and a beaming Tyler standing proudly beside a half-finished treehouse. "You wore those work boots I bought you for weeks," Mark said, smiling faintly. "Even to bed," your mother said. "Got new ones now," Tyler replied, gesturing to his steel-toed boots. "Earned them myself." For a moment, father and son stood in silence, the photo bridging the gap of 6 months apart. Around them, the construction site buzzed with purpose. Concrete poured, frames rising, every worker contributing to something greater than themselves. "One condition," Mark finally said. "You keep the garage job on weekends. Finish what you started there. No walking away when things get tough." Tyler nodded. Like Mom and Brad did. Mark's expression didn't change. Their choices. Their consequences. He tucked the photo into his shirt pocket. "We build differently." The sun climbed higher as Tyler joined the crew, learning each role and seeing how individual efforts united to achieve a common goal. During breaks, he observed Mark interacting with his workers. No pretense, no borrowed authority, just genuine respect and shared pride in their craft. By the end of the day, Tyler's new toolbox bore its first scratches, his safety papers had their first creases, and his understanding of building had grown beyond just physical structures. As the crew packed up, Mark spoke again. "Those community college courses you mentioned, they're not cheap." Tyler shrugged, hefting his toolbox. "Been saving. Might take longer, but I'll earn it. No shortcuts this time." Mark nodded, then reached into his truck and pulled out a thick envelope. "Your college fund. Never touched it. Been waiting to see if you'd build something worth investing in." Tyler stared at the envelope, its weight more than just financial. "I won't waste it this time," he said quietly. "I know," Mark replied, his voice steady. "Because this time, you're building your own foundation." As Tyler drove back to his mother's small apartment, his new hard hat resting on the passenger seat, he understood that some bridges couldn't be bought or borrowed. They had to be built one honest day's work at a time. 1 year had transformed the small northern town into Mark's new stronghold. His construction company's reputation for quality work spread quickly, planting roots in the community. The modest house he'd purchased, a fixer-upper far below his means, stood half-renovated, the client projects always taking priority. On a quiet Sunday morning, Mark was reviewing project bids at his worn kitchen table when a familiar Honda Civic pulled into his gravel driveway. Tyler stepped out, still dressed in work clothes despite the weekend, holding an envelope and a set of rolled blueprints. "Thought you'd be at the garage," Mark said as Tyler entered through the unlocked door. "Davis promoted me to lead mechanic last month," Tyler replied, pride coloring his voice. "Trained my replacement yesterday. But I've got something to show you." He handed Mark the envelope, an acceptance letter to the local university's engineering program. Not the manicured lawns of Stanford or legacy admissions, but a school that values practical experience alongside academic achievement. "Full scholarship," Tyler explained, laying out the blueprints. "Between the garage work, time spent with your crew, and credits from community college, they saw what they needed to see." Mark studied the technical drawings, Tyler's first solo project for his construction management course. The details showed an understanding born from hands-on experience, not textbook theory. "Has Mom seen these?" Mark asked, noting the precision in each measurement. "She has," Tyler replied, pulling up a kitchen chair, his movements comfortable with earned confidence. "The apartment's small, but she's managing. She even started teaching finance classes at the Adult Education Center. She says she finally understands what you meant about building versus borrowing." And then he sighed. "Last I heard, Brad's selling used cars in Phoenix. Her lawyer found evidence of other affairs. He lost his finance license." Tyler traced a load-bearing calculation on his blueprints. "Funny how hollow everything he offered looks now." Mark nodded, recalling May's designer lifestyle built on his hard work. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones we didn't think we needed to learn. Speaking of lessons, Tyler reached into his work bag and pulled out a weathered photo album. "Found this while organizing Mom's storage. Remember this day?" The photograph showed a younger Alan and Tyler standing proudly before their first joint project, the completed treehouse. Tyler's hands were bandaged from rookie mistakes, but his smile spoke of earned achievement. You insisted on sanding every board yourself, Mark remembered. You wouldn't let me help when you got splinters. You said I had to earn my calluses. Tyler's laugh held newfound understanding. I wish I'd remembered that lesson before. Everything? Mark studied his son, no longer the entitled teenager drawn to borrowed luxury, but a young man who had rebuilt himself from the foundation up. The transformation over the past year showed in more than just his calloused hands and worn boots. It was evident in his new perspective. Got a new project starting, Mark said, pulling out his own set of blueprints. Community center expansion. Recognize the load calculations? Tyler examined the drawings, recognition dawning. These are based on my design from engineering class. The town council approved the changes. If you want to see your first real project come to life, I've got room for you. Tyler grinned. I've got vacation time saved up at the garage. Been waiting for the right project to use it. Their discussion of construction details was interrupted by Mark's phone, a text from May. Tyler caught the brief hesitation before his father handed him the phone. The message read, "Found this while packing up the winter storage." Attached was a photo of Alan's original toolbox, the one he had used. To teach Tyler, "It belongs to both of you now. I finally understand what it represents." Tyler zoomed in on the worn leather and steel that had shaped his earliest lessons. She's not the same person who chose Brad's borrowed glamour over your built stability, Mark said simply. The question is, are they building something better from the wreckage? The morning sun streamed through the windows that Alan had installed himself, illuminating father and son, surrounded by blueprints and possibilities. Outside, Alan's truck waited for Monday's work, its bed loaded with materials for honest labor. Some things, Mark said, reaching for his ever-present hammer, you have to build yourself. Tyler smiled, understanding the weight of the moment, and added, some things, he said, are worth rebuilding together. They bent over the community center plans, calculating measurements and checking angles. The morning passed in comfortable focus, each man adding his expertise to their shared vision. No borrowed prestige, no shortcuts, just the quiet satisfaction of creating something real. As the shadows lengthened, Tyler gathered his blueprints. Mom asked about you. Not for herself, he added quickly. She just hopes you found what you were always trying to build. Mark glanced around his modest home, at the half-finished renovations that symbolized his new life. Never lost sight of it, he said. Just had to clear away some unstable additions. The Honda's engine started as Tyler prepared to leave. Through the windshield, he watched his father return to the porch. Not the man who had silently funded a privileged lifestyle, but the builder who had taught him life's most valuable lesson. Lasting things come from honest labor. The sunset painted the northern sky as father and son parted ways, each returning to the foundations they had chosen to build upon. Their shared future would rise like the community center, one carefully measured beam at a time, supported by understanding earned through sweat and time. Some distances couldn't be bridged with borrowed luxury or fleeting prestige, but with enough honest work and true materials, even the deepest foundations could be rebuilt stronger for having known what it meant to fall. Epilogue. 5 years later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across Taylor Construction's newly expanded headquarters. Where once stood a modest side office, now rose a 3-story testament to earned success. Alan surveyed the property from his modest office, the walls adorned not with certificates of prestige, but with framed blueprints, each marking a milestone in rebuilding his life. A sleek Tesla pulled into the visitor's parking lot, drawing his attention. May stepped out, her designer clothes replaced by practical business wear, her once perfect manicure now serviceable and worn. 5 years had etched lines around her eyes that no expensive cream could hide. She wasn't here to see Alan. Those bridges had long since been declared unsalvageable. Instead, she was here to attend Ryan's project presentation. Their son, now head of Taylor Construction's engineering division, had risen through merit rather than manipulation. In the conference room, filled with investors and town council members, May slipped into a back seat, watching Ryan command the room with quiet confidence. His presentation detailed the company's latest development: affordable housing built with innovative, sustainable materials. No flash, no borrowed prestige, just solid plans built on proven foundations. The Taylor Standard, Ryan explained, gesturing to projected figures, means building for generations, not just immediate profit. His eyes met his mother's briefly. We've learned the cost of choosing appearance over substance. In the front row, Ryan's wife, Sarah, beamed. They met at the garage where he'd started rebuilding his life. She'd been a customer with a stubborn transmission problem. Their courtship had progressed like one of Alan's projects, carefully, honestly, with a solid foundation. After the presentation, May lingered, watching Alan congratulate his son. Their relationship had weathered the storm, emerging stronger for having been tested. Her own relationship with Ryan remained a work in progress. Weekly dinners in her modest apartment, conversations that carefully avoided mentioning Jason. The past 5 years had taught May hard lessons about the price of choices. Her finance manager position had ended when the dealership downsized, Jason's mismanagement having finally caught up with the books. The adult education center where she now taught basic financial literacy paid less, but offered something she'd never found in luxury: purpose. Through local business circles, occasional news of Jason reached her. Each update reinforced the wisdom of Alan's early assessment about men who built things versus men who sold them. The former BMW sales manager now worked at a struggling used car lot in Phoenix. His license to sell securities permanently revoked after investigations revealed a pattern of fraud. His ex-wife had won everything in their second divorce, his pattern of affairs providing ample ammunition. The last May heard, he lived in a rented room, making payments on debts that would follow him for decades. The leased BMW and borrowed prestige had vanished like morning fog under a harsh sun. "Mom," Ryan's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah, and I wanted to ask you something." May turned to find her son and daughter-in-law, their expressions suggesting news. Sarah's hand rested unconsciously on her stomach, and May understood. "We're due in March," Sarah explained, her smile genuine. "We'd like you to be involved, but there are conditions," Ryan finished. His tone held no cruelty, just hard-earned wisdom. No designer baby boutiques, no exclusive preschool applications. "Our child will learn values from the ground up, just like Dad taught me." Eventually, May nodded, accepting these terms as part of her ongoing penance. "I'd like that," she said, "to see a proper foundation being laid from the start this time." Across the room, Alan discussed technical specifications with his project managers. His company had grown, but not through flashy acquisitions or leverage buyouts. Each expansion came from proven results, each contract earned through demonstrated quality. The modest house he'd renovated had become a home, its improvements made with care rather than show. He'd never remarried. Building something real meant acknowledging when some structures couldn't be salvaged. As the meeting dispersed, May found herself alone in the conference room. Through the window, she watched Alan and Ryan head to the construction yard, their matching work boots raising dust as they discussed the day's tasks. A framed photo on the wall caught her eye: the old treehouse, with young Ryan and Alan standing proudly. Beside it hung a recent addition: Ryan and Sarah on their wedding day, posed not in front of a luxury venue, but at the community center Alan had been building when Ryan first sought redemption. The same center that now hosted May's financial literacy classes, where she taught others about the true cost of choosing appearance over substance. Her phone buzzed with a news alert about Jason.